Hello, and welcome back to Speak English Daily.
Hi, everyone. We are very happy to see you here today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Speak English Daily, the podcast where you can relax, listen to real conversations, and improve your English one step at a time. I'm Anna.
And I'm Mike. It's great to have you here with us again. Whether you're listening while driving, walking, studying, or maybe even washing the dishes, we're glad you decided to spend some time practicing your English with us today.
Today's topic is something that almost everyone finds interesting. It's about reading people. Have you ever looked at someone and wondered, are they telling the truth? Or maybe you had a strange feeling that something about their story didn't sound right.
Yeah, that feeling when your brain says, something is a little suspicious here.
Exactly. Humans are naturally curious about other people. We watch faces, body language, tone of voice, and sometimes we try to guess what someone is really thinking.
And today we're talking about something many people believe they can do. Spot lies instantly.
You see this idea everywhere, in movies, in TV shows, and even on social media. Someone claims they can look at a person for just a few seconds and immediately know if they are lying.
But here's the real question. Is that actually possible? Can someone really detect lies that quickly?
That's what we're going to explore today. We'll talk about body language, tone of voice, and the small signals people sometimes show when they feel uncomfortable.
We'll also talk about something important. Sometimes the signals we think are lies are actually just nervous habits. Someone might avoid eye contact or speak slowly simply because they're shy.
Exactly. So learning to read people is not about judging quickly. It's more about observing carefully and understanding how human behavior works.
And by the end of this episode, you might start noticing little details in everyday conversations that you never noticed before.
So if you're ready, grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and let's start today's conversation. Let's talk about how people try to read each other every single day. Mike, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that strange feeling that someone wasn't being completely honest with you?
Oh, definitely. I think everyone has experienced that at some point. Maybe a friend tells a story and something about it just feels a little off.
Right. And sometimes we can't explain exactly why we feel that way. It's just a small voice in our mind saying, something doesn't match here.
Psychologists often call that intuition. It's like your brain is collecting tiny signals without you even realizing it.
For example, maybe the person suddenly changes their tone of voice, or they pause for a long time before answering a simple question.
Or maybe their story changes slightly the second time they tell it.
Exactly. Humans have been reading each other's behavior for thousands of years. Long before technology existed, people had to depend on observation to understand who they could trust.
Think about early human communities. If someone in the group was dishonest or dangerous, it could affect everyone.
So the ability to notice unusual behavior was actually very important for survival.
And even today, in modern life, trust still plays a huge role in our relationships.
When we meet someone new, we quickly start forming impressions. We notice their smile, their posture, the way they speak.
Sometimes these impressions are correct, but sometimes they're completely wrong.
That's the tricky part. Humans are good at guessing, but we're not always good at being accurate.
Exactly. In fact, many studies show that most people are not very good at detecting lies.
Really? That's surprising.
Yeah, many people believe they can easily tell when someone is lying, but research suggests that people are only correct about half the time.
So basically, it's almost like flipping a coin.
Pretty much.
That's interesting because movies often show detectives who can instantly read a person's face and know the truth.
Yes, but real life is usually more complicated than that.
Still, even if we're not perfect at detecting lies, we naturally keep trying. Our brains are always looking for patterns.
And that leads us to the next part of our discussion.
The signals people believe reveal the truth. Let's talk about body language and why many people think it can expose a lie. Body language is fascinating because so much communication happens without words.
Yes, some researchers even suggest that a large part of communication is nonverbal. That includes facial expressions, gestures, posture, and movement.
Think about a simple example. Imagine someone saying, "I'm really happy to see you," but their face looks serious and their arms are crossed.
That would feel strange, right? The words say one thing, but the body language says something completely different.
Exactly. When people try to detect lies, they often watch for these kinds of contradictions.
For example, someone might say they feel relaxed, but their foot is shaking constantly under the table.
Or they might say everything is fine while their shoulders are tense and their smile looks forced.
Small signals like that can sometimes show that a person is feeling uncomfortable.
Another common example is touching the face. Some people believe that when someone lies, they may touch their nose, cover their mouth, or rub their eyes.
But again, we need to be careful with these assumptions.
Right. Someone might touch their face simply because they are tired or thinking.
Or maybe they have an itch.
Exactly. Our bodies move naturally all the time, and not every movement has a hidden meaning.
However, body language can still give us useful information when we look at patterns.
That's important. Instead of focusing on one small action, it's better to notice several signals together.
For example, imagine someone suddenly becomes very still, stops making eye contact, and starts answering questions very briefly.
Those changes might suggest that something about the conversation is making them uncomfortable.
But even then, discomfort does not automatically mean dishonesty.
Sometimes people simply feel nervous discussing certain topics.
That's why understanding people requires curiosity rather than quick judgment.
Instead of immediately thinking, "this person is lying," it might be better to think, "something here is interesting. I should pay attention."
Exactly. Observing without jumping to conclusions is a powerful skill.
And body language is only part of the story. Another important clue can be found in something we hear every day.
A person's voice.
So, Mike, we've talked about body language, but there's another signal people often pay attention to when they suspect someone might not be telling the truth.
Their voice.
Exactly. The way someone speaks can sometimes reveal how they're feeling emotionally.
For example, when people feel nervous or stressed, their voice might change slightly. They might speak faster than usual, or sometimes much slower.
Yes, and pauses can become longer too. Someone might stop in the middle of a sentence while they try to think about what to say next.
That's interesting because when people are telling a true story, they often speak more naturally. The memories come easily.
But when someone is inventing information, their brain has to work harder.
Right, they're not only telling the story, they're also trying to make sure the story sounds believable.
That extra mental effort can sometimes appear in their speech.
For example, they might repeat words or phrases.
Or they might use extra explanations that weren't really necessary.
Imagine asking someone a simple question like, "Did you finish the report?"
If the answer is yes, the natural response might simply be, "Yes, I finished it this morning."
But someone who feels nervous might say something like, "Well, I was working on it, and I always try to finish my work on time, and I looked at it again earlier today."
So instead of giving a clear answer, they give a very long explanation.
Exactly. That doesn't automatically mean they're lying, but it can suggest they feel uncomfortable.
Another interesting clue is changes in tone.
Sometimes a person's voice may become slightly higher when they're stressed.
Or they might clear their throat more often.
Again, these are not perfect signals. Some people naturally speak this way even when they're telling the truth.
But when you combine voice signals with body language and the situation itself, you can start to understand people a little better.
It's like collecting small pieces of information.
And the more pieces you notice, the clearer the picture becomes.
But here's something important we should mention.
Sometimes our interpretation of these signals can be completely wrong.
Exactly, and that leads to an interesting problem.
The moments when our instincts mislead us.
Anna, have you ever misunderstood someone's behavior and later realized you were completely wrong?
Oh yes, many times. I remember once I thought a colleague at work didn't like me.
Really? What made you think that?
Whenever we spoke, she seemed very quiet. She avoided long conversations and rarely smiled.
So you assumed she wasn't friendly.
Exactly. But after a few weeks, I discovered something surprising.
What happened?
She told me that she was simply very shy when meeting new people. Once she felt more comfortable, she actually became one of the most kind and supportive people in the office.
That's a great example of how easily we can misinterpret behavior.
Yes, what I thought was dislike was actually just nervousness.
Our brains often try to create quick explanations for what we see.
And sometimes those explanations are completely inaccurate.
Another situation where people misjudge behavior is during stressful conversations.
For example, imagine someone being asked a difficult question in front of many people.
They might hesitate, look away, or struggle to find the right words.
But the reason might simply be pressure, not dishonesty.
Exactly. Stress can affect anyone.
This is why experts often say we should avoid making conclusions based on one single moment.
Instead, it's better to observe patterns over time.
How does the person usually behave?
Do their stories remain consistent?
Do their actions match their words?
These kinds of observations give us more reliable information.
Another important thing to remember is that everyone communicates differently.
Some people are naturally expressive, using lots of gestures and facial expressions.
Others are more reserved and quiet.
So if we expect everyone to behave in the same way, we'll often misunderstand them.
Reading people is not about becoming suspicious of everyone.
It's about becoming more aware and thoughtful in our communication.
And interestingly, some people are actually very skilled at hiding their emotions.
Which brings us to our next topic.
Why some people can lie convincingly without showing obvious signals. So, Mike, we've talked about how difficult it can be to detect lies, but there's another interesting question. Why are some people actually very good at lying?
That's a fascinating topic. When we imagine a liar, we often picture someone who looks nervous, avoids eye contact, and struggles to speak clearly.
But in reality, some people can lie while appearing completely calm.
Exactly. One reason is preparation. If someone has already planned their story, they may feel much more confident when telling it.
That makes sense. If you rehearse something in your mind, it becomes easier to say it naturally.
Another reason is personality. Some people are naturally more confident communicators.
They may speak clearly, maintain eye contact, and control their body language very well.
And because they appear relaxed, others may assume they are telling the truth.
There's also something psychologists sometimes call emotional control.
Right. People who can manage their emotions effectively might not show the usual signs of stress when lying.
So their body language and voice remain steady.
Exactly. And here's another interesting factor. Practice.
Practice?
Yes, just like any skill, communication improves with experience. If someone has lied many times before, they may learn how to avoid obvious signals.
That's a little scary when you think about it.
It can be, but the good news is that truly convincing lies usually require a lot of effort.
Because the person must remember every detail of the story.
Exactly. If someone invents information, they have to make sure their story remains consistent later.
And that can become difficult over time.
Right. Small details might change or contradictions might appear.
So instead of trying to detect lies instantly, sometimes it's better to simply listen carefully and ask thoughtful questions.
That's a much more reliable approach.
And that leads us perfectly into our next topic.
How asking the right questions can reveal much more than simply watching someone's body language.
Let's talk about the power of curious and thoughtful questions.
Anna, asking good questions might be one of the most powerful communication skills we can learn.
I completely agree. A well-asked question can reveal information that people might not share otherwise.
And the key is asking questions that encourage someone to explain, not just answer yes or no.
Exactly. Open questions invite people to describe their thoughts or experiences in more detail.
For example, instead of asking, "Did you finish the project?" you might ask, "How did the project go today?"
That kind of question encourages a longer response.
And longer responses often contain more details.
Details can be helpful because they allow us to understand the situation more clearly.
Another useful technique is asking someone to describe something step by step.
For example, if someone tells you about an event, you might ask, "What happened after that?"
Or, "What did you do next?"
These questions gently guide the conversation forward.
And they also help reveal whether the story remains consistent.
But it's important to stay respectful.
Definitely. If questions sound aggressive or suspicious, people may become defensive.
And once someone feels attacked, communication usually becomes less honest and less productive.
Instead, curiosity should feel natural.
Almost like you're simply interested in learning more.
Another helpful strategy is listening carefully without interrupting.
When people feel heard, they tend to speak more openly.
And sometimes they even reveal information without being directly asked.
That's a great reminder that communication is not just about talking.
It's also about paying attention.
Observing tone, noticing pauses, and understanding emotions.
All of these small details help us understand people more deeply.
And when we combine observation with thoughtful questions, we become much better communicators.
Which brings us to something fun.
A little real-life scenario.
Let's imagine a conversation where someone might not be telling the whole truth.
And see how curiosity and observation work in practice. All right, Mike, let's try a little scenario. Imagine this situation. You and I work in the same office, and there was an important meeting this morning. One of our teammates, David, was supposed to present a report.
Okay, I'm picturing the situation.
But David didn't show up. Later in the day, he comes to the office and says he missed the meeting because his alarm didn't ring.
That sounds like a common excuse.
Exactly. Now imagine we're talking to him during lunch.
All right, let's play it out.
So I might say something like, "Hey David, we missed you at the meeting this morning. What happened?"
And David might reply, "Oh yeah, my alarm didn't go off. I woke up really late."
Now, at this moment, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Alarms do fail sometimes.
Right, so instead of accusing him, we could simply ask another question.
Maybe something natural like, "That's frustrating. Did you get home late last night?"
That kind of question keeps the conversation friendly while encouraging him to explain more.
Exactly. If David answers comfortably and gives clear details, the story might be completely true.
But if he suddenly becomes very vague, things might feel different.
For example, he might say, I was just, doing some stuff."
That answer doesn't give much information.
Right. So you might gently continue the conversation.
Maybe something like, "Oh really? Were you working late or just relaxing?"
Again, this question doesn't accuse him of lying. It simply invites more explanation.
And sometimes when people feel comfortable, they may even admit the real reason.
Maybe David laughs and says, "Honestly, I stayed up too late watching a series and forgot to set my alarm."
That's actually a very human moment.
Exactly, and that's an important lesson.
Understanding people is often less about catching lies and more about creating a space where people feel comfortable telling the truth.
When conversations feel safe instead of confrontational, honesty becomes much easier.
And that approach usually leads to better relationships as well.
Which brings us to the final part of today's conversation.
What we should really remember when trying to understand other people.
So today we explored a very interesting idea, whether it's possible to read people and detect lies instantly.
And what we discovered is that human behavior is far more complicated than that.
Body language, tone of voice, and speech patterns can sometimes reveal emotions.
But none of these signals are perfect indicators of dishonesty.
Someone might avoid eye contact simply because they're shy.
Or they might hesitate while speaking because they are nervous or tired.
That's why understanding people requires patience.
And curiosity.
Instead of assuming the worst, it's often better to observe carefully and ask thoughtful questions.
Communication works best when we stay open-minded.
Because every person has their own personality, habits, and way of expressing emotions.
Another important lesson is that trust grows through conversation.
When people feel respected and heard, they're much more likely to speak honestly.
And sometimes the goal shouldn't be to catch someone in a lie.
It should be to understand the situation more clearly.
Exactly. Strong communication skills are not about suspicion.
They're about awareness.
Noticing details, listening carefully, and staying curious about the people around us.
And for English learners, conversations like these are also a great opportunity to practice listening and understanding real communication.
So the next time you speak with someone, try paying attention to the small details.
Notice tone, body language, and the way stories are told.
But remember to stay patient and thoughtful.
Because understanding people is a skill that develops over time.
Just like learning a language.
Exactly.
And speaking of language learning, we're really glad you joined us today.
Thank you for spending this time practicing your English with us.
Keep listening, keep learning, and most importantly,
keep speaking English every day.
We'll see you in the next episode of Speak English Daily.
Take care, everyone.